She was 6, too young to write her name without trembling, too young to understand treaties, truces, or thrones. And yet, on a cold November morning in 1396, she walked down the aisle of St. Paul's Cathedral to become a queen. Have you ever wondered what it feels like to have your entire childhood traded for a promise of peace? This is not a fairy tale. There were no happy endings. Just politics, power, and a little girl dressed in golden silks, too heavy for her tiny frame. Her name was Isabelle of France, and history almost forgot her. But today we won't. In the next 30 minutes, we'll uncover the haunting life of England's youngest queen, from the madness of her royal father to the silence of her widowhood at age 10. From the rare glimpse of love in a second marriage to a quiet death no one seemed to notice. This isn't just a story about the past. It's a mirror to every moment in history when power spoke louder than innocence and little girls paid the price. Let's begin. The candles flickered like stars inside St. Paul's Cathedral, but for one little girl, they might as well have been flames leading her into the unknown. Isabelle of France was just 6 years old, not even tall enough to lift her crown without help, when she became Queen of England. Hundreds of nobles watched in solemn admiration as the golden-haired child took timid steps down the aisle. The organ echoed through the vaulted ceilings, drowning the quiet sobs of a child who didn't understand the words political alliance. To those seated in the pews, this was a grand ceremony, a display of peace between two warring kingdoms. To Isabelle, it was something else entirely. She clutched her doll a little tighter that morning before leaving the Louvre. It would be her last day as a little girl, and she didn't know it yet. What makes this moment so haunting isn't just her age. It's how normal this was. In medieval Europe, young girls from royal bloodlines were often married off as pawns in negotiations. It wasn't shocking, it wasn't scandalous. It was strategy. A girl's value wasn't in her voice or her dreams or even her future, it was in her dowry. Isabelle's marriage to Richard II, a man more than 4 times her age, came with a dowry worth £800,000 and a promise of a 28-year truce. That's what peace cost in 1396, the innocence of a child. As the Archbishop of Canterbury knelt to slip the ring onto her trembling finger, Isabelle looked around for someone, anyone who looked familiar. There was no one. Only silk, stone, and silence. And that was just the beginning. Before she ever wore a crown, Isabelle was born into a kingdom unraveling at the seams. It was November 9th, 1389, a dark autumn day in Paris, when Isabelle took her first breath inside the opulent walls of the Louvre Palace. Her father, Charles VI of France, should have been the most powerful man in Europe. Instead, he was losing his grip on reality. By the time Isabelle turned 3, she'd already seen her father flee down palace halls, convinced enemies were hiding in shadows. He screamed, hid, refused to recognize his wife or children. At times, he believed he was made of glass, fragile, invisible, doomed to shatter if touched. This was not a fairy tale. This was her nursery. And her mother, Isabelle of Bavaria, provided no safe haven. Cold, calculating, and power-hungry, she used her husband's madness as an opportunity to rule behind the scenes. To the world, she was a queen regent. To Isabelle and her siblings, she was distant, distracted, a strategist more than a mother. Isabelle learned early that survival required silence. Emotions were dangerous in a palace where power shifted like the wind. Her toys were polished, but her world was broken. The lullabies she heard weren't about love, they were whispers of alliances, betrayal, and war. The 100 Years' War raged between France and England, while factions inside her own court, the Armagnacs and Burgundians, tore the kingdom in half. In the middle of it all stood a little girl, unnoticed, unseen, but vital. She wasn't born to live, she was born to be used. And soon the world would come calling. In the smoke-filled chambers of medieval diplomacy, Isabelle wasn't a child, she was a contract. By 1396, England was exhausted. King Richard II, recently widowed and increasingly isolated, needed peace. France, drained by war and chaos, needed money. Both sides needed something, and what they found was her. A 6-year-old girl with golden curls and royal blood. French envoys, led by the Duke of Berry, laid out their offer like merchants at a market. Isabelle of France in exchange for £800,000 and nearly 3 decades of truce. Not love, not kinship, not even alliance, just a transaction and investment in peace. The English court hesitated. Even by medieval standards, Isabelle was too young. Some argued the marriage should wait until she turned 12, the appropriate age for consummation. But Richard couldn't afford to wait. His throne was fragile. Rebellions stirred. Coffers ran dry, and the French offer came wrapped in silk and silver. So the negotiations moved forward, cold and meticulous. They debated her dowry, her escort, her wardrobe, everything but her voice. She had none. To her mother, Isabelle was a successful export. To her father, in a rare moment of lucidity, she was a tearful goodbye. To the diplomats seated at long oak tables, she was a line in a treaty, a guarantee inked in bloodlines. What no one asked was what it would cost her. In a world ruled by men and power, Isabelle was currency, and her childhood was the first installment. The English coast appeared like a misty dream, distant, gray, unfamiliar. For most, it was a symbol of diplomacy achieved. For Isabelle, it was the edge of the world. She arrived with an entourage fit for royalty, nobles, servants, guards, even her small lapdog from the Louvre. Each English town they passed greeted her with festivals, flowers, and parades. But behind the pageantry, the little girl grew quieter. Her eyes stopped sparkling. Her questions faded. She cried often, quietly, asking when she would go home. At Westminster Palace, she was given her own rooms, tutors fluent in French and silks to rival any noblewoman. She was addressed as Your Majesty, bowed to, celebrated. But she was still just a child. Richard II, to his credit, treated her with surprising tenderness. He saw not a wife but a daughter, perhaps even a mirror of the youth he had lost to duty. He ensured her comfort, protected her from court gossip, and never forced intimacy. For a brief moment, Isabelle's life found stability, structured, ceremonial, but kind. She studied, played in royal gardens, and clung to the few reminders of home, her dolls, her dog, and the language that surrounded her in soft whispers. Yet no matter how gently England wrapped its arms around her, she never stopped feeling like a guest in someone else's story. She was called queen but had no power. She was a bride but knew no love. She was home but never truly belonged. And peace, the very reason she was sent here, was about to shatter. On a crisp autumn morning in 1399, the whispers that had long snaked through the hallowed corridors of Westminster like icy currents suddenly transformed into a deafening thunder. The news, inevitable and brutally swift, spread like wildfire through the court. Richard II was gone. The king, once absolute, had been utterly overthrown. While the young Queen Isabelle, utterly oblivious to the storm that raged beyond her immediate perception, wandered through the fading glory of Westminster's formal gardens, her childlike fingertips idly brushing against the delicate petals of late-blooming roses, her entire world was collapsing with dizzying speed behind the imposing, silent palace doors. The rebellion, long gestating in the shadows of discontent, had finally taken deep root and now bloomed with an unstoppable, violent force. Led by Henry Bolingbroke, the king's ambitious cousin and a man whose hunger for the crown knew no bounds. In a matter of mere weeks, Richard was captured, his royal authority stripped away. In a few short months, he was dead. Some chroniclers of the era, their voices hushed and fearful, whispered that he slowly starved in his cold, desolate cell, a lingering, agonizing end. Others, with greater conviction, believed he was brutally murdered within the grim confines of Pontefract Castle, a regicide swiftly silenced. The truth, like the very crown that had so violently changed hands, passed quietly, shrouded in mystery and political expediency, from one head to another. And amidst this voracious maelstrom of betrayal and death stood Isabelle. With barely 10 years of age, she was a widow. She wore no traditional mourning dress, nor did her eyes shed tears of a lost romance, for such a thing had never truly existed. Her profound loss was not that of conjugal love, but rather a hollow absence, an existential void that only a child, stripped of her innocence and her predetermined future, could carry with such a crushing weight. She had never been kissed by her husband, never shared a secret, knowing glance across a banquet table, but she had nonetheless lost her husband. She had lost her title as Queen of England. She had lost, in one devastating stroke, her entire future. England, now firmly under the iron heel of the usurper, found itself at a perplexing crossroads, uncertain what to do with this child queen. The young queen had produced no heirs, for her marriage had never been consummated. Yet she had been crowned, anointed with sacred oil, a queen in the eyes of God and tradition. Was she still a queen in the eyes of men? Or merely a ghost of one, an awkward, inconvenient relic of a deposed reign? Worse still, her substantial dowry, a considerable fortune brought from France, had long since vanished into the empty coffers of the royal treasury, squandered by the previous court's extravagance. To return her to her native France now meant repaying debts that, in the precarious financial situation of the new monarch, simply could not be honored. So the new king, Henry IV, a pragmatic man utterly devoid of sentimentality, made a cold, calculated decision that once again irrevocably changed the course of young Isabelle's life. He would keep her not as an honored guest, not as a queen with lingering rights, but as a valuable political asset, a strategic pawn on his own dynastic chessboard. The heavy palace doors, symbols of power and exclusion, closed behind her. The world, indifferent to her personal tragedy, moved inexorably onward. And Isabelle, a child once more, stripped of her crown but burdened by the weight of a lost title, disappeared from the grand stage of the throne to enter the silent, oppressive corridors of captivity. A captivity that for a princess of France was a gilded cage, but a cage nonetheless, its bars fashioned from political necessity and the cold realities of power. They called it honorable captivity, a euphemism, perhaps, designed to soften the harsh realities of political imprisonment, to cloak the brutal truth in velvet and silk. Havering Castle, indeed, was no dank, rat-infested dungeon. It boasted manicured gardens, where the scent of roses mingled with the crisp English air. Its chambers were lined with rich velvet, and its guards, though ever present, were polite, almost deferential. But for Isabelle, the child queen, it was still a prison, and she knew it with an unsettling clarity that belied her tender years. At just 10 years old, she possessed an understanding that many adults, even those steeped in the complexities of courtly life, never truly grasped. Golden cages, no matter how exquisitely crafted, no matter how luxurious their appointments, are still cages. The bars might be gilded, the food plentiful, but the freedom to choose, to move, to simply be, remained brutally absent. Henry IV, the usurper king, kept her close, a valuable pawn in his precarious new reign. He harbored a calculated hope that her royal French blood, her very existence as a former queen, might serve as a crucial asset in future negotiations with her powerful Valois relatives. She was not overtly mistreated, no physical harm came to her, but she was watched. Every movement, every interaction, every fleeting expression was noted. Her world was meticulously circumscribed, limited in where she could go, in what she could read, in who she could truly trust. And so she wrote letters, dozens of them, a desperate, almost frantic outpouring of a confined spirit. To her mother, the Queen of France, to her brothers, the young princes. To anyone in France who might possibly listen, who might remember her plight. "I write to you in tears," she once penned, her words remarkably steady for a child, "for I am kept here like a prisoner, far from all I love, without hope of return." Her words were not the naive scribbles of a bewildered child. They were clear, composed, and utterly heartbreaking in their raw honesty. With each carefully chosen sentence, Isabelle revealed just how deeply the crucible of sorrow and isolation had forced her to grow. The weight of her circumstances, the burden of her lost status, had aged her faster than any birthday could. Finally, miraculously, one of her many letters reached her father, King Charles VI of France, in a rare, precious moment of lucidity amidst his recurring bouts of madness. He read it aloud, they say, his hands shaking, perhaps with a mixture of paternal grief and royal indignation. And for the first time in years, he issued an order with chilling clarity and unwavering resolve. Bring my daughter home. Well, it took 2 more arduous years of negotiation, political maneuvering, and diplomatic wrangling. But in 1401, at the age of 12, Isabelle finally crossed the English Channel once more, a journey she had made as a child bride, now undertaking as a young woman. She was older, undeniably wiser, and carrying the profound, echoing silence of captivity deep within her bones. She was free. But freedom, for a soul so profoundly marked by loss and confinement, had never felt so lonely. The world she returned to was changed, and so was she. What awaited this young, scarred queen in her native France, and could a spirit so deeply wounded ever truly find peace, or even love after such a beginning? They called it honorable captivity, a euphemism, perhaps, designed to soften the harsh realities of political imprisonment, to cloak the brutal truth in velvet and silk. Havering Castle, indeed, was no dank, rat-infested dungeon. It boasted manicured gardens, where the scent of roses mingled with the crisp English air. Its chambers were lined with rich velvet, and its guards, though ever present, were polite, almost deferential. But for Isabelle, the child queen, it was still a prison, and she knew it with an unsettling clarity that belied her tender years. At just 10 years old, she possessed an understanding that many adults, even those steeped in the complexities of courtly life, never truly grasped. Golden cages, no matter how exquisitely crafted, no matter how luxurious their appointments, are still cages. The bars might be gilded, the food plentiful, but the freedom to choose, to move, to simply be, remained brutally absent. Henry IV, the usurper king, kept her close, a valuable pawn in his precarious new reign. He harbored a calculated hope that her royal French blood, her very existence as a former queen, might serve as a crucial asset in future negotiations with her powerful Valois relatives. She was not overtly mistreated, no physical harm came to her, but she was watched. Every movement, every interaction, every fleeting expression was noted. Her world was meticulously circumscribed, limited in where she could go, in what she could read, in who she could truly trust. And so she wrote letters, dozens of them, a desperate, almost frantic outpouring of a confined spirit. To her mother, the Queen of France, to her brothers, the young princes. To anyone in France who might possibly listen, who might remember her plight. I write to you in tears, she once penned, her words remarkably steady for a child, for I am kept here like a prisoner, far from all I love, without hope of return. Her words were not the naive scribbles of a bewildered child. They were clear, composed, and utterly heartbreaking in their raw honesty. With each carefully chosen sentence, Isabelle revealed just how deeply the crucible of sorrow and isolation had forced her to grow. The weight of her circumstances, the burden of her lost status, had aged her faster than any birthday could. Finally, miraculously, one of her many letters reached her father, King Charles VI of France, in a rare, precious moment of lucidity amidst his recurring bouts of madness. He read it aloud, they say, his hands shaking, perhaps with a mixture of paternal grief and royal indignation. And for the first time in years, he issued an order with chilling clarity and unwavering resolve. Bring my daughter home. Well, it took 2 more arduous years of negotiation, political maneuvering, and diplomatic wrangling. But in 1401, at the age of 12, Isabelle finally crossed the English Channel once more, a journey she had made as a child bride, now undertaking as a young woman. She was older, undeniably wiser, and carrying the profound, echoing silence of captivity deep within her bones. She was free. But freedom, for a soul so profoundly marked by loss and confinement, had never felt so lonely. The world she returned to was changed, and so was she. The bells of Paris rang as she returned, a cacophony of sound that filled the air, but they did not ring for her. They rang for the city, for the day, for anything but the young queen who had been returned like a piece of unwanted baggage. After 6 long, formative years abroad, Isabelle of France stepped once again onto the hallowed soil of her birth. But the girl who had left as a princess, a pawn in a grand dynastic game, now returned as a ghost of 2 kingdoms. No longer England's queen, her crown dissolved, and never truly France's cherished daughter, her place usurped by chaos. At 12, she had already seen more of the brutal realities of politics and courtly betrayal than most seasoned courtiers twice her age. Yet there were no eager embraces waiting for her at the Louvre. No warm, tearful fireside reunions. Her family, still tragically entangled in the deepening chaos of civil war and the king's recurring bouts of madness, welcomed her with mere ceremonial nods and a quiet, almost palpable inconvenience. She was a problem solved, but also a new burden. To her mother, Queen Isabelle, a woman hardened by her own struggles for power, Isabelle was little more than a failed investment. A girl returned with no crown, no husband, and most crucially, no immediate political value in the volatile French court. Isabelle was given rooms, certainly, chambers within the sprawling palace, but not a true place within the family or the court. She was assigned servants, but received little genuine affection. She retained a title, a hollow echo of her former glory, but was offered no clear path to a future. She wandered the palace corridors, a solitary figure, her young face etched with an experience that made her seem far older than her years, her eyes searching for something she could no longer quite name, a sense of belonging, perhaps, or a purpose. Her former playmates had grown into strangers, their shared childhood memories vanished somewhere between the grandeur of Westminster and the gilded confinement of Havering. There were no grand plans for her next chapter, only silence. A profound, echoing quiet that seemed to swallow her whole. But silence, she had learned in her captivity, could be a kind of armor, a shield against the prying eyes and the indifferent hearts of the court. She filled her days with reading, immersing herself in ancient texts and tales. She found solace in the intricate patterns of embroidery, her nimble fingers weaving threads into new forms. And she continued to write letters, her thoughts flowing onto parchment, a private world of expression. She watched the court with quiet, perceptive attention, absorbing every nuance, every shift in allegiance. She listened and she waited. Because even in a world that seemed to have forgotten her, even amidst the chaos of a fractured kingdom, history had not yet finished using her name. Her story, far from over, was merely entering a new, uncertain chapter. What role would this quiet, observant young woman, once a queen and now a forgotten princess, play in the turbulent future of France, and could she ever truly escape the shadows of her past? At the tender age of 16, Isabelle was called once again to the altar, a familiar ritual of royal duty and political expediency. But this time, amidst the solemnity and the calculated glances of the court, something profoundly, unexpectedly, was different. His name was Charles of Orleans. He was young, unlike the aging monarch she had first been wed to. He was poetic, with a sensitive soul that found expression in verse. He was gentle, a stark contrast to the often brutal and calculating men of power she had known. He was not a king burdened by a crown. He was not a tyrant wielding fear. He was not merely a transaction, a piece of property to be exchanged. He was simply a boy with verses in his heart and a rare tenderness in his gaze. And for the very first time in her young life, Isabelle was not merely a bargaining chip, a political pawn on a grand chessboard. She was, astonishingly, a person. Their union was still arranged, of course. Still undeniably political, a strategic alliance between powerful houses. But behind the closed doors of their private chambers, away from the prying eyes and cynical whispers of the court, a genuine affection, fragile yet profound, began to bloom. They walked together in the palace gardens, not with watchful guards trailing their every step, but with the easy intimacy of two souls finding solace in each other. They whispered poems into the soft glow of candlelight, sharing thoughts and dreams that transcended the cold realities of their world. They laughed not the rehearsed, polite laughter of courtly pretense, but real, spontaneous joy that bubbled up from within. For a precious, fleeting moment, Isabelle felt what had long been denied to her, what she had perhaps never even dared to dream of. Choice, a true, personal choice in the labyrinth of her existence. She chose to love. And in a world that had offered her so little warmth, she was loved in return, a gentle flame against the encroaching darkness. But history, cruel and unrelenting in its march, was not yet done with Isabelle. Her brief respite from sorrow was destined to be tragically short-lived. In 1407, just 2 brief years into their blossoming marriage, a devastating blow struck. Charles of Orleans, her gentle poet husband, was captured by the English during the brutal, chaotic Battle of Agincourt. He would remain a prisoner, a pawn in a larger conflict for an agonizing 25 years. And Isabelle, now barely 18 years old, her fragile happiness shattered, was once again a widow in practice, if not yet in name. The rooms they had once filled with laughter, with whispered poems and shared dreams, turned quiet, echoing with the ghosts of what might have been. The poetry she had cherished turned inevitably to prayer, a desperate plea for solace in a world that seemed determined to deny her happiness. And Isabelle, robbed of love for the second time, her spirit bruised and weary, turned inward, finding strength in a quiet, profound resilience. She did not remarry. She did not rebel against her cruel fate. She simply endured. Because endurance, she had learned through a lifetime of loss and confinement, was the only thing the world had consistently allowed her. It was her armor, her weapon, her very mode of being. But how long could even the strongest spirit endure such repeated heartbreak? And what silent strength would this young, twice-widowed princess forge in the long, lonely years that stretched before her? History, in its grand narratives of kings and battles, often forgets those who suffer silently, those whose lives are marked not by thunderous declarations, but by quiet endurance. Yet silence, as Isabelle of France so profoundly demonstrated, can leave an imprint deeper, more resonant than any noise. After the devastating news of Charles's capture, Isabelle, still barely out of adolescence, faded from the public eye. Not in disgrace nor in formal exile, but simply in stillness. A profound, almost deliberate withdrawal from the tumultuous currents of courtly life. She remained at the French court, a presence rather than a participant, no longer the political darling she once was, no longer a queen with a crown. Yet she was not entirely irrelevant either. For a mind sharpened by the harsh lessons of 2 courts, 2 crowns, and countless, often treacherous, negotiations, she became a quiet, unofficial advisor. Her insights, born of bitter experience, were undeniably wise. Younger royals, navigating the treacherous waters of French politics, sought her thoughts in hushed whispers, valuing her detached perspective. Ambassadors, accustomed to the bombast of powerful men, often found themselves respecting her measured silence more than the most eloquent speeches. And though she never penned grand memoirs, her quiet presence, her subtle observations, shaped decisions more profoundly than any royal decree. In this enforced quietude, she found solace in small, meaningful acts. Sponsoring struggling poets, offering comfort to the poor, visiting chapels at dusk where she could find moments of profound reflection. Charity became her quiet language, a way to express the empathy she had cultivated through suffering. Reflection, her most sacred ritual. In 1409, a fragile new life entered her world. She gave birth to her only child, a daughter, Jean. It should have been a moment of unadulterated joy, a tangible legacy. But as she gazed into her daughter's innocent eyes, Isabelle saw not just a new beginning, but a cycle she feared might tragically repeat. A girl destined not for dreams of her own, but for the cold, calculating demands of diplomacy and dynastic arrangement. Still, despite her fears, she held that tiny baby tightly, whispering lullabies not of power or sacrifice, but of peace, of a quiet hope for a different, gentler future. Isabelle of France died tragically later that same year, succumbing to postpartum complications. She was only 20 years old. There were no grand parades, no solemn declarations of national mourning, no elaborate state funerals. Just quiet mourning in quiet halls. The very same halls where, as a child queen, she had once wandered alone, a prisoner of circumstance. But even in death, her quiet strength remained, etched not into forgotten monuments, but into the enduring, whispered memory of those who understood. Because sometimes, the loudest legacy is the one that whispers through time, a testament to resilience, dignity, and the profound impact of a life lived with quiet courage amidst the chaos of history. Isabelle of France was born into the very crucible of power, and ultimately, tragically, buried in silence. Her life, though brief, serves as a poignant testament to the often unseen sacrifices demanded by the grand machinations of medieval European politics. She was crowned a queen before she truly learned to write, her destiny sealed by treaties and alliances long before she could even grasp their meaning. She was widowed before she ever understood the tender complexities of love, her heart a stranger to romance. And she was sacrificed, repeatedly, relentlessly, before she ever had a genuine say in any of it, her will subsumed by the will of kings and kingdoms. Her entire existence was, in essence, a meticulously kept ledger of diplomacy. A staggering £800,000 dowry exchanged for a fragile truce. A second marriage, arranged not for affection, but for the elusive promise of dynastic stability. A daughter conceived for the sole purpose of succession to continue a bloodline. Every single chapter of her short, impactful life was marked not by what she needed for herself, not by her desires or dreams, but by what others, her family, her nation, her captors, demanded and extracted from her. And yet through it all, through every loss, every confinement, every betrayal she endured. With a quiet, almost imperceptible strength she persisted. She never ruled in her own right. She never led an army into battle. She never signed a treaty as a sovereign power. But she stood and continues to stand as a profound and enduring reminder, a silent witness to the truth that behind every grand alliance, every elaborate royal ceremony, every monumental political decision, there is often a child. A voice unheard, a life bargained away, an innocence sacrificed on the altar of ambition. Isabelle's story, therefore, is not merely a medieval tragedy, a footnote in the annals of forgotten queens. It is a timeless warning. Even now, in a world far removed from the gilded thrones and intricate treaties of the 15th century, the echoes of her plight resonate. Girls are still traded for power, for status, for the fragile illusion of peace. And their stories, tragically, still vanish into the margins of history, overlooked, unacknowledged, unheard. But Isabelle's doesn't have to. We have the power to change that. Let her name be more than a mere footnote in a dusty chronicle. Let her story be more than a tale of sorrow and loss. Let it be a mirror, held up to every society, every generation that dares to sacrifice innocence for ambition, to barter away the lives of the young for the perceived gains of the powerful. Because she was more than a queen, she was a girl, and she mattered. Her quiet endurance, her profound suffering, and her silent legacy demand that we remember.